The cold was more than just the winter outside. It seemed to seep into Clara's very bones. The wind whipped through the empty streets of the small town, carrying with it a bite that made her shiver violently. Each gust felt like it was trying to push her back, to make her turn around and give up, but she kept moving forward. Her boots sank into the thick snow with every step, leaving a trail behind her, a small mark that someone might have noticed, if anyone had been out in the dark, lonely night. But the town seemed abandoned. The windows of the houses were dark, the doors tightly shut, and the soft glow of a few streetlights flickered in the icy wind. It was as if the world itself had gone to sleep and left her to face the storm alone. Clara pulled her coat tighter around her. It had been given to her years ago, a hand-me-down from a distant relative, and though it offered some protection, it was not enough to fight off the harsh winter air. Her scarf, frayed and thin, barely covered her neck, and her gloves had holes in the fingers. She had been living on her own for too long, and her small earnings barely bought her enough food and warmth to survive. Life had been cruel, stripping away the people she loved, leaving her to navigate the world without guidance or comfort. The loneliness was the hardest part. It wasn't the cold, the hunger, or even the fear that gripped her. It was the emptiness, a void that had grown inside her over the years, eating at her heart until every day felt like a repetition of the last. Tonight felt especially unbearable. The weight of everything she had lost pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her thoughts wandered back to happier times, times that now seemed like distant dreams. She remembered laughter, warmth, and the feeling of being safe. But those moments had slipped through her fingers like sand, and she had no one to hold on to anymore. Her parents had died when she was young, leaving her in the care of relatives who never truly cared. Friends had drifted away, and love had always seemed just out of reach, leaving her with nothing but the cold that had settled in her soul. As she walked, Clara noticed the way the snow crunched under her feet. It was a sound she had grown used to, but tonight it felt hollow, echoing in the empty streets like a reminder of how alone she was. Every street corner, every shadowed alley seemed to whisper the same thing. She was on her own. The town, usually familiar and comforting, now felt like a vast, icy wilderness. The buildings, coated in frost and snow, stood silent and unwelcoming. Even the trees were bare, their skeletal branches trembling in the wind, and she felt a kinship with them, stripped bare and exposed to the harshness of life. Her mind wandered again, and she thought about the future, or rather, the lack of it. She had dreams once, small ones, like finding a place where she belonged, meeting someone who would care for her, or even just being able to sleep without nightmares. But those dreams had faded with the years, replaced by a quiet resignation. She had learned to survive, to go from day to day without expecting anything good to happen. And yet, a small, stubborn part of her refused to let go entirely. That tiny spark made her keep moving forward, even when the cold seemed unbearable. Clara's hands were numb, her fingers aching despite her gloves. She pressed them against her cheeks, trying to bring some warmth back, but it was useless. The icy air burned her skin, and she felt her eyelids growing heavy from exhaustion. She had been walking for hours, with no destination in mind, only a hope that anything might break the monotony of her endless struggle. Her stomach growled faintly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten properly in a day. Hunger added to the cold, making her feel weaker and more vulnerable. Yet she refused to stop. Stopping meant giving in, and Clara had never allowed herself to give in, no matter how hard life pushed her down. The snow continued to fall, soft at first, then heavier, covering the footprints she had made and blurring the path behind her. It made the world look different, like a dream or a painting, beautiful yet dangerous. She walked past the old school building, its windows cracked and dark, and thought about how it had once been filled with laughter and life. Now it was silent, a reminder of how quickly things could change, how quickly warmth could be replaced by cold and joy by emptiness. Clara felt a pang in her chest, a sharp ache that made her stop for a moment and look around. The world seemed so quiet, so still, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Her thoughts drifted to the people she had met over the years, the fleeting friendships and brief encounters that never lasted. There was a man who had once smiled at her in the market, a kind gesture that had meant more than he could have known. There was a friend from childhood who had moved away, leaving behind only memories and a sense of loss. And there were strangers who had looked at her with indifference, as if her existence didn't matter. All of these experiences had shaped her, hardened her, and yet softened her in ways she didn't fully understand. She knew that life could be cruel, but she also knew that small acts of kindness had the power to change everything. As she walked further into the night, Clara's steps became slower. Fatigue was creeping in, her body begging for rest. She had no home to return to, no warm bed to crawl into, only the endless snow and the biting wind. Yet, she couldn't stop. Something inside her urged her forward. A faint hope that maybe, just maybe, there was someone out there who would understand her, who would see past the cold that had taken over her soul. The thought was fragile, almost laughable, but it gave her the strength to keep moving. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Clara saw a faint light in the distance. It was small, almost insignificant, but it was enough to make her heart beat faster. The light flickered, like a signal in the darkness, and she felt a strange mix of fear and hope. She didn't know who or what was waiting there, but the light represented something she had almost forgotten, the possibility of warmth, safety, and connection. Her steps quickened, the snow crunching under her boots as she moved toward it, each stride filled with a quiet determination. In that moment, Clara felt something shift inside her. The cold was still there, biting and cruel, but it was no longer the only thing she felt. There was a spark, faint but real, that reminded her that she was still alive, still capable of feeling, still capable of hope. She didn't know what awaited her at the source of the light, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. And with that belief, she continued forward, stepping into the unknown, ready for whatever or whoever might be waiting to save her from the cold that had consumed her for so long. Clara's eyes were drawn to the faint light flickering in the distance. It seemed impossibly small against the endless expanse of white snow and darkness. Yet, it gave her a sense of direction she hadn't felt in days. Her legs ached, and every step was a struggle against the biting wind, but she kept moving. With each step, the light grew clearer, revealing the faint outline of a cabin, simple and sturdy, its roof coated in thick snow. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, promising warmth and safety, and a part of Clara dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone lived there and could offer her shelter. As she drew closer, she saw a figure standing near the door. At first, she couldn't make out much. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a quiet confidence that made Clara pause. There was something reassuring about the way he stood, steady and calm in the midst of the storm. His coat was heavy and weathered, his boots thick and practical, and in his hands he held a lantern, its warm glow cutting through the cold darkness. Clara hesitated, unsure if she should approach, her instincts warning her to stay away. But her body, cold and trembling, overruled her caution. She needed warmth. She needed safety. And, though she didn't know it yet, she also needed kindness. The man noticed her almost immediately. His eyes, sharp but gentle, softened as they took in her shivering form. Without a word, he stepped forward and held out the lantern, its light illuminating her pale, wind-bitten face. Clara felt a shiver that wasn't from the cold pass through her, a mixture of fear and relief. There was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding and quiet concern. The man's presence was commanding yet comforting, like a steady hand in a world that had spun out of control. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice calm and deep, carrying over the sound of the wind. "It's too dangerous." Clara wanted to argue, to tell him she was fine, that she didn't need anyone's help. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat was dry, her body weak from the cold, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to accept that she couldn't do this alone. She nodded, barely, and the man stepped closer, holding the lantern high enough to light her path. "Come inside," he said simply. "You'll catch your death out here." Clara followed him, her steps hesitant but hopeful. As they approached the cabin, she noticed how sturdy it looked, how it seemed to promise safety in a world that had offered so little of it. The door creaked as the man opened it, revealing a small but cozy interior. A fire burned in the hearth, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. The scent of wood and warmth enveloped her, and for the first time in days, Clara felt a sense of relief wash over her. She could finally feel her fingers and toes again, and the tension in her shoulders began to ease. The man led her inside and gestured toward a chair near the fire. "Sit here," he said. "You need to warm up." Clara obeyed, lowering herself carefully into the chair, feeling the heat from the fire seep into her cold body. The man knelt briefly to remove her snow-covered boots, and then he handed her a thick blanket. She wrapped it around herself, savoring the warmth and protection it offered. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and curiosity. Who was this man? Why did he help her without hesitation? Most people in the town barely acknowledged her existence. But here was someone offering comfort without expecting anything in return. "My name's Luke," he said, finally sitting across from her. "And you are?" "Clara," she replied softly, unsure why she felt compelled to answer. Luke nodded, as if acknowledging her existence was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't ask where she came from, or why she was out in the storm. Not yet. He simply offered her the chance to regain her strength, a simple act that meant more to Clara than she could put into words. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a burden or a stranger, but as a person worthy of care. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle inside. Clara felt her racing thoughts begin to slow, her heart rate settling as the warmth spread through her body. She noticed details she hadn't in days. The way the firelight danced on the wooden walls, the soft hum of the wind outside, the comforting scent of burning wood. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary, because for Clara, ordinary moments of peace were rare and precious. Finally, unable to contain her curiosity, Clara asked, "Why are you helping me?" Luke looked at her, his eyes steady and kind. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one should be out in this weather alone, and no one should have to face the world without a little help." Clara was struck by the simplicity of his answer. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't filled with expectation or judgment. It was just kindness, plain and simple. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back, unsure if she was allowed to feel this relief, this sudden warmth in her chest. She had spent so long surviving alone, she had forgotten that people could be good without a reason. As the evening went on, Luke prepared a small meal for her, a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. It wasn't much, but it was more than Clara had eaten in days. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, not just for the food, but for the sense of normalcy it brought. Luke watched quietly, giving her space, yet remaining close enough that she felt safe. There was no rush, no pressure, only the steady presence of someone who cared. After the meal, Luke suggested she rest. "You need to regain your strength," he said. "The storm will pass, but it will take energy to face it." Clara nodded, grateful for the invitation to rest. She curled up in the blanket near the fire, letting the warmth envelop her completely. As she drifted off, she couldn't help but reflect on the man who had appeared out of the storm. Luke was more than just a stranger offering shelter. He was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the harshest winters, there could be light. Throughout the night, Clara listened to the storm outside, but it didn't frighten her as much anymore. She knew she was not alone. Luke's presence, quiet and steadfast, gave her a sense of protection she hadn't felt in years. She drifted between sleep and wakefulness, feeling the cold leave her body, and slowly, a warmth enter her heart. By morning, the storm had not yet ended. But Clara felt different. The fear and loneliness that had clung to her for so long were lighter. She had been rescued not just from the cold, but from the despair that had threatened to consume her. Luke's quiet strength, his kindness, and his willingness to help without asking anything in return had sparked something inside her, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: trust. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the storm clouds, illuminating the snow-covered landscape, Clara realized that this night had changed her. It was not just about surviving. It was about realizing that there were still people in the world who could offer compassion, understanding, and warmth. Luke had given her more than shelter from the storm. He had given her hope, the first step toward healing the cold that had eaten her soul. And so, with the fire still crackling and Luke quietly tending to his cabin, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find more light in her life. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that she might not have to face it alone. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the small cabin, there was a sense of calm that Clara hadn't felt in years. The warmth from the fire wrapped around her like a protective blanket, and Luke moved about with quiet efficiency, fetching another log to feed the fire and keeping the room bright and cozy. Every movement he made seemed natural and confident, yet there was a softness to him that Clara noticed without fully understanding. He didn't rush her, he didn't pry into her life, yet his presence was comforting, almost like the world had suddenly made a place for her, even if just for tonight. Clara sat in the chair near the hearth, still wrapped in the thick blanket. The warmth had seeped into her bones, but more than that, it had seeped into her heart. She felt safe, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She watched Luke quietly, noting the way his hands worked to prepare a place for her, the steady rhythm of his movements, and the calm way he carried himself. It was hard to believe that a person like him could exist in a world that had often been cruel to her. She wondered what his story was. What had brought him here, to this quiet, snowy town, where the storm seemed endless. There was a strength about him. But it wasn't just physical. It was the strength of someone who had endured life's hardships and chosen to remain kind despite them. After a while, Luke returned with a small plate of food, simple, warm, and comforting. "Eat something," he said, placing the plate before her. "You need your strength." Clara hesitated for a moment, embarrassed by how hungry she was and how little she had eaten recently. She had grown used to going without, to enduring. But something in Luke's eyes made her feel allowed to accept help. Slowly, she began to eat, savoring each bite, feeling nourishment spread through her body. Every spoonful felt like a small victory against the cold and the hunger, and she realized how much she had missed this simple comfort. While she ate, she noticed Luke sitting nearby, not pressing her to speak, but ready to listen if she wanted to. Clara's mind wandered back to the years of loneliness, the struggles she had faced, and the many times she had wished for someone to understand her, to see her as more than just a face passing through life. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. Relief that someone had appeared without judgment, offering kindness without condition. It was a new and foreign feeling, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. Yet she welcomed it quietly, like the warmth of the fire against her cold skin. Finally, after what felt like hours of comfortable silence, Clara found her voice. "Why? Why are you helping me?" she asked, her words soft, almost hesitant. Luke looked at her, his eyes calm and unwavering. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one should be out in a storm like this alone, and no one should have to face life without a little kindness now and then." Clara stared at him, struck by the simplicity and honesty of his words. They weren't meant to impress her, to manipulate her, or to make her feel obligated. They were just the truth. And that honesty cut through the walls she had built around herself. For the first time in years, she felt that maybe the world wasn't entirely cruel. There were still people who acted with compassion, even without reason, and Luke was one of them. As the night wore on, Clara began to share fragments of her story. She didn't speak of everything, some wounds were too deep, memories too painful, but she told him about her life in the town, the years she had spent struggling alone, and the loneliness that had consumed her. Luke listened quietly, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, never judging. His calm presence made it easier for her to speak, easier for her to acknowledge the pain she had carried for so long. He didn't offer solutions, didn't give advice. He simply listened, creating a space where Clara could speak without fear. It was a rare gift, and she felt herself relax more and more as the minutes passed. The cabin, with its warm fire and quiet comfort, became a sanctuary from the storm outside and the storms she carried within her heart. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel that it was okay to be vulnerable, that it was okay to let someone see the parts of her that had always been hidden. Luke shared pieces of his own story, not to overshadow hers, but to show her that she was not alone in facing hardship. He spoke of long journeys through cold landscapes, of hard work and quiet victories, of loss and hope intertwined. His stories were simple, but they carried weight because they were real, and Clara found herself drawn to the honesty in his words. She realized that despite the differences in their lives, there was a common thread. Both of them had endured struggle, and both of them had survived. That realization made her feel connected to him in a way she hadn't expected, and the warmth between them grew stronger. The storm continued to howl outside, but inside the cabin, the air felt lighter. Clara felt a shift in herself, a small but significant change. She had spent so long feeling invisible, unworthy of care. But Luke's presence reminded her that she mattered. His quiet attention, his unwavering patience, and his gentle gestures of kindness were teaching her to trust again. Trust wasn't something she had given easily, but with Luke, it felt natural. She found herself laughing softly at some of his small, humorous remarks, feeling the tightness in her chest loosen. Hours passed, and the night grew deeper, but Clara didn't feel the fatigue she had earlier. Instead, she felt a strange energy, a sense of life that had been dormant for so long. The cold that had eaten at her soul was still there, lingering at the edges of her mind, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. The warmth of the fire, the comfort of the food, and, most importantly, the presence of Luke began to melt away the ice inside her. For the first time in years, she felt hope, a fragile, quiet hope, but hope nonetheless. At one point, Clara hesitated, then asked, Do you always help strangers?" Her voice was small, uncertain. Luke looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Not always," he admitted. "But when someone needs help, and I can give it, I do. It's not about recognition. It's about doing what's right. A. My. Clara nodded slowly, absorbing his words. They weren't dramatic or poetic, but they carried a truth she found grounding. Life had been complicated for her, full of hardships she hadn't chosen. And here was a person whose actions were simple, yet profoundly meaningful. It was a reminder that even in a harsh world, small acts of kindness could change lives. As the night wore on, Clara realized that she felt safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. She could sit here, speak honestly, and not be judged. She could let the walls around her heart drop just a little, allowing warmth to seep in. Luke's cabin had become more than a refuge from the storm. It had become a place where she could begin to heal. The fire's warmth spread through her body, but it was the quiet, steady presence of another human being that warmed her soul the most. By the time the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, Clara felt a subtle transformation within herself. The fear and hopelessness that had weighed on her for so long were still present, but they were no longer overwhelming. There was a spark of trust, a spark of courage, and a spark of hope. Luke had not only saved her from the cold outside, but he had also shown her that the cold inside her heart could be softened by understanding, compassion, and genuine human connection. And so, as the storm began to lessen, Clara sat by the fire, wrapped in the blanket, feeling a new sense of possibility. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she believed that perhaps there was someone who would stand by her, even in the hardest moments. The warmth she felt wasn't just from the fire, it was from the realization that she wasn't entirely alone in the world, and maybe, with time, she could learn to open her heart again. The night had deepened outside, but inside the small cabin, the fire's warmth created a world entirely separate from the cold, harsh winter that raged beyond the walls. Clara sat near the hearth, wrapped in the thick blanket Luke had given her, feeling the steady rhythm of the flames. Each flicker of light painted shadows across the room, dancing on the wooden walls, and somehow made the space feel alive. She realized, slowly, that she had not felt truly alive in years. The constant struggle, the loneliness, and the despair had made her numb. But here, in this quiet cabin, with the storm outside and Luke sitting calmly nearby, a spark of life had returned to her chest. Luke moved about the cabin quietly, tending to the fire, making sure there was enough warmth to keep the chill at bay. His movements were calm and purposeful. But Clara found herself watching him more than the fire. There was a quiet strength about him, a balance of toughness and gentleness that seemed rare in the world. He wasn't trying to impress her, nor did he seek her approval. He simply existed with a kind of quiet authority that made her feel safe, a stark contrast to the years of uncertainty and fear she had lived through. "Would you like some tea?" Luke asked, his voice low and steady, carrying over the crackling of the fire. Clara nodded, grateful for the offer. The tea was simple, brewed from dried herbs, but the warmth it provided spread through her hands and body, making her feel more alive, more present in the moment. She sipped slowly, letting the taste and warmth remind her of small comforts she had long forgotten. As she drank, Clara's thoughts drifted, as they often did in quiet moments. She thought of the past, of days filled with fear and loneliness, of nights spent shivering alone in poorly heated rooms, of dreams that had faded with time. She thought about the weight she carried, not just of survival, but of the emotional emptiness that had become her companion. Yet, sitting there with Luke quietly nearby, she felt the first real stirrings of hope she had allowed herself to feel in years. It was strange to feel this way, and Clara struggled to name the emotions swirling inside her. Relief. Yes. Gratitude. Certainly. But deeper than that was a sense of connection. Something she hadn't experienced in so long that it felt almost foreign. Here was someone who had not only noticed her struggle, but had chosen to act without hesitation, without expectation, without judgment. He had given her shelter, warmth, and simple companionship, and in doing so, he had quietly begun to mend the cracks in her heart. Unable to contain her thoughts any longer, Clara finally spoke, her voice soft and hesitant. "Luke, I don't think anyone has ever done this for me before." Luke looked at her, his gaze steady and warm. "Sometimes all a person needs," he said gently, "is a little help, a little understanding. That's all." Clara nodded, her eyes filling with tears she didn't bother to hide. She realized, with a mixture of relief and awe, that she could cry here without shame. She could show weakness without fear of judgment. That in itself was a revelation, a gift she hadn't known she needed until this very moment. For years, she had carried the burden of her struggles alone, believing that no one could understand. And yet, here was Luke, showing her that understanding and kindness still existed, quietly and without demand. As the fire crackled, the storm outside growing more intense, Clara felt an urge to speak more openly, to share the parts of herself she had long kept hidden. I've been alone for so long, she admitted, her voice trembling. I've faced so many winters, not just outside, but inside me, and I forgot what it felt like to trust someone, to feel safe, to feel. Her voice faltered, emotions choking the words. Luke remained silent, giving her the space to speak, listening with patience and care. His presence was enough to encourage her to continue. To feel warmth, she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. I forgot how it feels. I forgot how it feels to not be afraid. There was a long pause. Clara's gaze fell to her hands, twisted in the blanket. She could feel the weight of her words lingering in the air. The vulnerability she had shown felt terrifying, yet liberating. She had allowed someone to see the cold that had consumed her, and she had not been rejected. Instead, she had been met with understanding, with quiet strength and patience. Luke finally spoke, his tone soft but steady. You're not alone anymore, Clara. Not while I'm here. The words were simple, yet they carried profound meaning. Clara felt her heart stir, a warmth spreading that had little to do with the fire and everything to do with the feeling of being seen and cared for. She realized she could allow herself to hope, to believe in the possibility of connection, and even, perhaps, in the possibility of love. As the night deepened, the cabin became a cocoon, protecting them from the storm outside. Clara felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief, because she finally had someone who cared. Fear, because allowing herself to feel this way, to open her heart, was terrifying. She had spent so many years guarding herself, believing that showing weakness was dangerous, that dependence would only lead to disappointment. And yet, here she was, trembling not from the cold, but from the emotions she had suppressed for so long. Clara began, her voice catching. I need you tonight. The words hung in the air, tender and honest. They were not a demand, not a plea born from desperation, but a confession of a soul, recognizing warmth and safety for the first time in years. Clara's eyes searched Luke's, hoping he would understand the depth of what she meant. Luke met her gaze, his expression calm and kind. He didn't rush, didn't pressure, didn't make her feel vulnerable in a bad way. Instead, he offered the quiet reassurance that had characterized his presence all evening. The simplicity of his words wrapped around Clara like a shield. She felt the tension in her body begin to ease, the fear that had been a constant companion melting just enough to allow trust to grow. In that moment, she realized that the warmth she felt wasn't just physical, it was emotional. A deep, reassuring understanding that someone could care for her without judgment or expectation. Hours passed in quiet conversation, in comfortable silences, in shared glances and gentle smiles. Clara found herself laughing softly at small stories Luke told. Stories of simple life on the range, of the challenges he had faced, and the small victories that had given him strength. Each moment, though ordinary, carried profound meaning because it was shared. Clara realized that connection didn't have to be grand or dramatic to be meaningful. It could be quiet, steady, and real. The storm outside began to lessen, but inside the cabin, time seemed suspended. Clara felt herself letting go of fears she had carried for years. fears of rejection, of loneliness, of cold and emptiness. She felt a fragile sense of trust, a spark of hope, and an unfamiliar courage. The courage to allow herself to feel, to care, to hope. Luke's presence, steady and kind, had given her more than warmth. He had given her a space to heal, a moment to breathe, and a reminder that life could still offer kindness, understanding, and human connection. As the night wore on, Clara leaned back in the chair, her blanket wrapped tightly around her. She watched Luke as he tidied the cabin, noticing the small gestures of care he performed without a thought. She realized that it wasn't grand actions that mattered most. It was the consistency, the patience, and the quiet dedication to doing what was right. In those moments, she felt a sense of safety and belonging she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where warmth could exist in her life. A life where she might not have to endure hardship alone, where moments like this could happen again, and where she could trust someone with her heart. It was a fragile dream, yes, but it was a dream nonetheless. And for Clara, after so many years of cold and darkness, even a fragile dream felt like a miracle. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke through the lingering storm clouds, the snow-covered landscape outside the cabin was transformed into a sparkling world of white. The wind had softened, the sky held a faint pink glow, and the storm's harshness seemed almost like a memory. Inside the cabin, the warmth from the fire remained, mingling with the quiet, steady presence of Luke. Clara sat near the hearth, wrapped in the blanket, feeling the heat and the security it provided. But even more, she felt a growing warmth in her heart, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with the human connection she had found. The night had been long and full of emotions she had buried for years. She had cried, laughed softly, and shared fragments of her past. And through it all, Luke had listened with unwavering patience and understanding. It was the first time she had truly felt safe in years, not just physically, but emotionally. She had come to the cabin shivering from the cold, hollow from loneliness, and uncertain of herself. But she now realized that she had been given more than shelter. She had been given hope. Luke moved quietly, tending to the fire, feeding it with fresh logs to keep the warmth steady. He glanced at Clara with a small, gentle smile. Noting the way she sat, her posture relaxed. Her eyes no longer filled with fear or exhaustion, but with something new: curiosity, courage, and a hint of optimism. He had seen many people pass through hardships in his life. Yet there was something different about Clara. She carried her pain quietly, with dignity and resilience. And he admired the way she was slowly allowing herself to heal. Clara spoke softly, almost to herself. "I never thought I would feel this. Safe again." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of suffering. She paused, feeling the tears well up again. But this time, they were not tears of despair. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and a dawning sense of possibility. "I never thought I would find someone who could care without judgment," she continued, glancing at Luke, who met her gaze calmly and kindly. "You don't have to face everything alone," Luke said quietly, his voice steady and reassuring. "Even when life is harsh, there's always someone who can help. You just need to let them." "Donner," Clara nodded, the simplicity of his words striking her deeply. She realized that trust had been something she had long denied herself. For years, she had believed that relying on anyone would only lead to disappointment, that opening her heart would bring pain. But Luke's presence had shown her otherwise. His patience, quiet kindness, and unwavering support had begun to melt the ice that had formed in her soul, allowing warmth, hope, and the possibility of connection to grow. The morning light spilled across the cabin, illuminating the simple furnishings and the soft textures of blankets, wood, and stone. Clara felt a new sense of clarity, a sense that the world outside, though still cold and vast, could be faced with courage. She had endured so much alone, yet now she realized that she didn't have to continue that way. There was a space for hope, a space for connection, and maybe even for joy. The idea was fragile, but it was enough to lift her spirits. Luke noticed the subtle change in her demeanor and offered a quiet observation. "You're stronger than you realize," he said. "You've survived so much already. This is just another step on the way." Clara allowed herself a small smile, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in years. I think I'm ready for that step," she admitted. "I don't know what comes next, but I know I don't want to face it alone." The words were honest, unembellished, but they carried profound meaning. Clara understood now that healing was not instantaneous. It was a process that required patience, trust, and small, consistent steps. And in Luke, she had found someone willing to walk that path with her. He didn't promise to erase her past or solve all her problems, but he offered companionship, understanding, and the assurance that she was not alone. As the day began to brighten, the two of them stepped outside, the snow crunching softly under their feet. The world was quiet, almost magical, with the frost sparkling in the early sunlight. Clara breathed in deeply, feeling the cold air in her lungs, but also sensing a renewed energy coursing through her body. For the first time in years, she felt like the world held possibilities, not just challenges. The cabin behind them had been a sanctuary, but the journey ahead was where life would truly begin to unfold. Luke walked beside her, silent for a moment, giving her space to take in the beauty around them. Then he said, "The world isn't always easy, Clara. There will be storms, and there will be cold. But you've already survived so much you can survive anything." Clara looked up at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and newfound determination. "I think I can," she said softly. "With you, I think I can." It wasn't a declaration of dependence, but a recognition of partnership. She understood now that allowing herself to accept kindness, to trust, and to feel connection did not make her weak. It made her human. And in that humanity, she found strength she hadn't known she possessed. The sun climbed higher, melting the frost from the trees and revealing the landscape in full clarity. Clara felt the crisp air invigorate her, the light spark a sense of hope that had been dormant for so long. She realized that life, despite its hardships, still held beauty, still held moments worth cherishing, and still offered opportunities for connection and love. The cold that had eaten at her soul for years was no longer the defining force in her life. Luke's presence, kindness, and steady support had begun to thaw it, leaving space for warmth, hope, and renewal. As they walked together through the snow-covered fields, Clara reflected on how far she had come in such a short time. She had entered the storm exhausted, alone, and despairing, and now she was moving forward with strength, courage, and a fragile but growing sense of hope. She had learned that asking for help did not make her weak, that kindness existed even in the harshest conditions, and that trust and connection could begin even in the darkest winters. Luke glanced at her, noticing her thoughtful expression. "You've come a long way," he said, offering a gentle smile. "And there's still a long way to go. But you're not alone anymore." Clara smiled back, feeling a warmth that went beyond the sun, the fire, or the blanket she had wrapped around herself. It was the warmth of understanding, of human connection, and of hope. "I know," she replied softly. "And I'm ready to take it one step at a time." The day stretched ahead, full of possibilities, and Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She understood that life would not always be easy, that challenges would come, and that cold winters, both literal and metaphorical, would return. But she also knew now that she had the strength to face them, the courage to continue, and the presence of someone who cared to share the journey. Together, Clara and Luke walked through the snow, side by side, stepping into a future filled with promise. The cold that had once consumed her soul was no longer the center of her existence. Instead, it was a reminder of how far she had come, how much she had endured, and how capable she was of embracing warmth, hope, and connection. As the sun rose fully over the snow-blanketed fields, casting golden light across the world, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had survived storms, endured loneliness, and faced the harshness of life. And now, in the quiet companionship of Luke, she had discovered that healing was possible, that trust could grow, and that even the coldest winters could be overcome by warmth, care, and human connection. With every step she took, Clara felt the cold receding further from her heart. The journey ahead was uncertain, as all journeys are, but she carried with her a new strength, a renewed hope, and a connection that would guide her through whatever came next. The storm had passed, both outside and within, and she knew that she could face the future with courage, resilience, and the quiet assurance that she was no longer alone. For the first time in years, Clara felt truly alive, ready to embrace the world again, ready to trust, ready to hope, and ready to let the warmth she had found guide her forward.